Hello readers, I'm Amy, here today to continue my sexual assault book videos. So my previous video was all about books that I have read on sexual assault because I'm really into that niche genre. Today we are going to start the recommendations from Goodreads and from others videos. This is definitely going to be 2 videos, possibly 3, but I might be able to make it in 2. So today I am going to be focusing on 2 things. One is my Goodreads TBR that I had established before I asked for sexual assault book recommendations on Twitter. So these are the books that I already had on my Goodreads that were about sexual assault. The second part of this will be the nonfiction that was on my Goodreads and that was recommended to me from Twitter. So hopefully in this way I can split up the recommendations into 2 videos, hopefully less than an hour each because editing all of that content is exhausting. So let's go ahead and get started. First off, there will be spoilers because trigger warnings are spoilers, and also they're sexual assault videos. So you just deserve to get all of the spoilers because self-care. I have my computer here, so I will be looking down a lot. There's going to be lots of cuts and edits in this as I try and talk about like all of the synopses and things. So let's go ahead and get this started. First up on the list that I wrote down, so it's in no particular order, is Nina Is Not Okay by Shappi Khorsandi. This book focuses on poor coping skills, which I think is a really awesome focus for sexual assault books because I don't necessarily see them a lot. I see people trying to process things or struggling to talk with family members and friends. But as for unhealthy coping skills, that doesn't appear as much as I think it should, considering how many people have unhealthy coping skills after sexual assault. And this one focuses on drinking. Nina doesn't consider her drinking to be a problem, but Nina's mom does. But Nina's mom is busy with her new husband and 5-year-old Katie. And Nina wakes up one day and has very little memory of what happened the night before. So I think we can pretty much assume what happened here. That looks, again, really interesting, and I like seeing the unhealthy coping skills angle because I don't think people talk about it all that much, not as much as they should. Next up on my list is I Who Have Never Known Men. This is by Jacqueline Hartman, and it has a translator, so we're going to go ahead and assume that this was originally written in another language. This says, a young woman is kept in a cage underground with 39 other females guarded by armed men who never speak. Her crimes unremembered, if indeed there were crimes. The youngest of 40, a child with no name and no past, she arrives for some purpose long forgotten in a world ravaged and wasted. In this reality where intimacy is forbidden, in the unrelenting sameness of the artificial days and nights, she knows nothing of books and time, of needs and feelings. Then everything changes, and nothing changes. A young woman who has never known men, a child who knows of no history before the bars and restraints, must now reinvent herself, piece by piece, in a place she has never been, and in the face of the most challenging and terrifying of unknowns, freedom. That sounds totally amazing. Looks like we've had maybe some kidnapping, possibly a dystopia of some sort. This also reminds me of a book that I forgot to talk about in my hour-long video. In my hour-long video on book recommendations, I cannot believe I forgot this book. I forgot to talk about Room by Emma Donoghue. So jumping in here real quick with that before I get back to I Who Have Never Known Men, Room is about a woman who was kidnapped and kept in the garden shed of this man. She was repeatedly raped. She has a child from that rape. And the whole book is told from the perspective of that child when he is 5 years old and his mom has a plan for escape. I love that book. However, it is not for everybody because a lot of people I have found struggle with the 5-year-old perspective. I would put this book at like a 6 on my little reading scale there because you've got emotions, you've got kidnapping, you've got rape, you've got this 5-year-old who doesn't understand the world. It's a tough read, but I highly recommend. And also, that reminds me of I Who Have Never Known Men because you have these women in cages while in Emma Donohue's book, you have this woman who is in this garden shed cage. You've got a child who's never known the world, and then it looks like they gain freedom somehow or another, and that freedom, I think Emma Donohue really explored well in Room, because like you have this woman who's been locked away for years and is now going through depression and is living in this like mental health center, and this kid who doesn't know the world, and it reminds me so much of that, and I think I would love this book. And after this video, I'm probably going to go look it up on Libby and see if I can read it this month. Then we have Tampa, which I have seen around a lot and have not picked it up yet. This is another sexual assault book on teachers and students, which seems to be a pretty common way of writing sexual assault stories, which makes sense to me. It's a huge sexual fantasy for people, a role-playing fantasy, like have someone play the teacher, have someone play the student. It's come up in the news quite a bit, and you've got kind of a classic power dynamic there, so it makes sense to me that a lot of books would be telling that story. This one, we have a female teacher who is obsessed with 14-year-old boys. Looks like one of the boys that she gets involved with, his dad is attracted to her. So it looks like pretty classic teacher-student sexual assault story, but I am still interested in reading it, as obviously, because it's in this video. And then we have Native Son, which I actually found a copy of when I was with a friend at a used bookstore, and she's like, you have to get this, you have to read it. And I haven't read it yet, but I want to, and I hope to get to it soon. This one also clearly includes some race politics, which I really don't see a lot of in sexual assault literature. I think one of the reasons, I mean, besides so many books being written by white people, and most of the sexual assault books that I've read, I think except for Queenie, have been from the perspective of white people. But I also feel like in telling that story, you're including so much in the book about sexual assault that people don't usually put other stuff in there. So it'll be interesting to get this racial angle from it. And it says right from the start, Bigger Thomas had been headed for jail. It could have been for assault or petty larceny. By chance, it was for murder and rape. I'm wondering what that by chance means. That's what's really getting me interested in this book. I'm like, what do you mean by chance? Did he do it? Did he not do it? Was he framed? Is that what you mean by chance? I don't know. But this book has been looking really good to me lately. Next written on my list is Notice. And I don't have an author listed, and I am not seeing it on my to be read on Goodreads, which is weird. So if I can find it later, I will insert a clip here and talk about it. Alright friends, I have found it. I combed through my Goodreads TBR and I found Notice. It was written by Heather Lewis. Ignore the sounds in the background. My cat is very excited about a bird that he found outside the window. As a young adult, she started to turn tricks in the parking lot of a local bar. Not because she needed the money, but because the money made explicit what sex workers had always been for her, a loveless transaction. What sex had always been for her, not sex workers. A sadist takes her home to replay family dramas with his beautiful wife, and she becomes hopelessly drawn into their dangerous web, and eventually ends up in more trouble than she ever bargained for. Arrested and confined to a psych ward, a therapist is assigned to help her, but instead of treatment, they develop a sexual relationship, bringing her both confusion and revelation. So this shows, of course, that sex workers can be victims too. Obviously. Get with the program, people. This is a fiction. I'd be interested to see what other books Heather Lewis has written. Because this sounds right up my alley. Also, psych wards. I don't see psych wards in mental health fiction as much as I would like. Not that that is necessarily everyone's experience with mental health, but psych wards are very underrepresented. So I think that angle is going to be interesting. The therapist angle is not one that I see a lot. So this has been on my list, I think, since last year. I think I was looking at it for Mental Health-a-thon last year and hadn't been able to find it anywhere. But hopefully I can find a copy later this year and read it, because it looks really interesting. This book I'm not totally sure on. It's My Only Sunshine. This is a book that I saw Murphy Napier talk about last year. It's a self-pub. It looked so good. I don't remember if it actually includes sexual assault. It at least includes kidnapping. So she was kidnapped and is eventually released. She never escaped her trauma. The guy was never caught, and eventually he comes back into her life, kind of letting him know that she's there. So it looks really, really good, and I'll have to put one of Murphy Napier's videos down in the description so you can hear more about it. But it's looked really, really good. I've been wanting to read it for a while. I think it has sexual assault. I don't really remember, but I'm popping it in this video anyways because we're just kind of also going with the trauma theme, so that works. And as for books on my TBR, I think that's pretty much it. So we're going to move over to nonfiction, which we're going to start with the ones on my TBR that are nonfiction and then move on to the Twitter recommendations. And we're going to start with Excavation. This one I was made aware of through My Dark Vanessa, and it's a memoir by Wendy C. Oritz. Only child and bookish, my kind of girl, because I am also an only child and bookish. Insecure, alcoholic parents. A teacher 15 years her senior appeared to give her the kind of power teenagers wish for, regardless of consequences. So we have another teacher-student one. I don't know that I've read a teacher-student memoir yet. I think all of the teacher-student that I've read so far has been fiction. So I think it'll be really interesting to see nonfiction and how that dynamic happens in a nonfiction. Then we have The Five, The Untold Lives of the Women Killed by Jack the Ripper. I saw this on BookTube so much last year, and I've been wanting to read it. This last year I feel like is when we really started to see the politics of, yeah, true crime is interesting, but we don't really know anything about the victims. We only hear about the perpetrator, and the women victims are known through the perpetrator rather than on their own. I think that's some really interesting politics to start taking interest in. I'm here for it. And I don't really know anything about the women except that they're known as prostitutes, whether or not they really are. So yeah, that is one that I'm interested in picking up. I don't know when I'll get to it. It's not like at the top of my list or anything, but I am interested in it. And the last nonfiction on my already established Goodreads TBR is Asking for It, The Alarming Rise of Rape Culture and What We Can Do About It. This is, I think, just an informational book exploring rape in general. Looks like it's exploring a lot of different rape cases and arrests. It's saying sexual violence has been so prominent in recent years that the feminist term rape culture has finally entered the mainstream. I love seeing a book address rape culture. Lots of people are like, psh, rape culture, what? And I'm sitting here like, it's a real thing. So Asking for It looks like it's got a lot of research. Again, it's looking at a lot of rape cases, so this might be a little drier or it might not. I'm never really sure what to think of books like that. One more book that I'm going to talk about here. It is a recommendation from someone on Twitter. However, I am going to start reading it right after this video is shot. So Acacia Ives reached out to me and she's like, hey, I want to do a buddy read with you. We should read A False Report. And it was immediately available on Libby, so I picked it up and we're going to buddy read it in the first week of May. And I'm really, really excited. This has two Pulitzer Prize-winning journalists tell the riveting true crime story of a teenager charged with lying about having been raped, and the detectives who followed a winding path to arrive at the truth. I am immediately interested in this. It sounds kind of like another book that was recommended to me by someone on Twitter where a woman is raped and then says that she wasn't because the detectives don't believe her, and then other stuff happens. I believe that's also a nonfiction, so I might just talk about it next. But this one, there's a break-in, police become suspicious of her story, and I really want to look into that more. I have not read a book that talks about the possibility of a false report of rape. I have a lot of feelings about that, but it's also something that I want to read up more on, so I can become more knowledgeable on the topic. And I think this is going to be a really interesting read for sure. So the book that I was talking about that this sounds familiar to. Oh, is this? It is the same. Okay. So someone recommended, I think it might actually be the same book. Someone on Twitter, Kaz from Cats and Camera, I remember this. We were talking yesterday. And she recommended Unbelievable, which is going to be a Netflix series, and it has the same authors listed and pretty much the same premise. So I think Unbelievable and A False Report might actually be the same book, and then it was renamed Unbelievable for the Netflix series. It doesn't say that in the little intro here, but I think it's the same book. Interesting. I don't love renaming literature for the purpose of shows. Like in my first video where I talked about books that I've already read, I talked about Precious, which was renamed from Push, which was the original title of the book. I don't love that renaming because in situations like this, it makes it really, really confusing. So don't love that, but that's fine. Moving on, we have Lucky by Alice Sebold. This is the same author that did The Lovely Bones, which I talked about in my last video. So I'm not sure on reading this because Sebold tends to be a young adult author. I'm not super into young adult. Lots of people have lots of feelings on The Lovely Bones. I haven't reread it since I was younger, but I feel a little bit better about the book having read the stuff that I've read recently, where not all sexual assaults are going to look the same. So, I will probably read this, but it's definitely not going to be super high on my list. Lucky is a memoir about Sebold's own rape that happened when she was 18 near campus. Illuminates the experience of trauma victims, even as she imparts wisdom profoundly hard-won. You save yourself or you remain unsaved. Interesting quote. I like that. Next book is Eggshell Skull, which I could have sworn was on my TBR, and apparently I didn't actually check it off on Goodreads. But first off, this cover is so gorgeous. I like the pink, I like the skull, I like whatever insect that is. I just think it's beautifully done artwork. A well-established legal doctrine that a defendant must take their victim as they find them. If a single punch kills someone because of their thin skull, that victim's weakness cannot mitigate the seriousness of the crime. But what if it also works the other way? What if a defendant on trial for sexual crimes has to accept his victim as she comes, a strong, determined accuser who knows the legal system, who will not back down until justice is done? Bree Lee began her first day of work at the Queensland District Court as a bright-eyed judge's associate. 2 years later, she was back as the complainant in her own case. So this looks super interesting. It's based in Australia. I have not read a lot of Australian books, so I'm excited. And this, again, is a memoir. Memoirs are some of my favorite nonfiction because I love how personable they are. While I do read lots of other nonfiction and really enjoy it, a lot of times nonfiction and other genres is missing that personality that you find really coming out in memoirs that I love. So I'm hoping to be able to branch out more with my other nonfiction and find some really personable books. Brave by Rose McGowan. This was recommended to me. This is one, honestly, it's not super high on my list. I have mixed feelings on Rose McGowan and the way she approaches things. But that said, this is another memoir on her sexual assault dealings with, I believe it was Harvey Weinstein. And I do love a good Hollywood story. Hollywood is fascinating to me. Also, Rose was born in a cult. It says she came of age in another, more visible cult, Hollywood, which Hollywood is totally a cult. I would believe that. So I am interested in it. I will probably read it eventually, but it's not necessarily super high on my list. But if it's something you're into, by all means, grab it. She is certainly a personality. And like most women in Hollywood, has been super sexualized, which isn't great. The Little Girl on the Ice Floe by Adelaide Bond. There is a translator. Does this say where this book is from? I don't think it says. Oh, this French bestseller. That makes me hesitant because I, as regular watchers of my channel know, I am not super into French authors. It hasn't really worked for me, but I'm always willing to try, and I have not tried a French nonfiction yet. When Adelaide's parents find her mute and unable to explain why she is crying, they bring her to the police station and file a complaint against X for sexual assault. That reminds me of Speak, which I forgot to mention it in my last video, but in Speak, it's called Speak because the girl who is the main character just stopped speaking after her sexual assault. She just doesn't talk about anything. She can't get her lungs to open up and her voice to come out. And that's what this reminds me of, this idea that you just become mute and stop talking. It says there are no outward signs of damage, which unfortunately happens a lot. It is really, really hard, almost impossible, to prove a physical rape, which is tough. And analysis points to a man known to the police as a serial burglar. He is subsequently charged with assaulting 72 minors between 1983 and 2003. You have caught my interest. Also, I'm not sure what this picture on the cover is supposed to be. Like, it's some kind of machine. I don't know, but it looks interesting. Next up is, again, a book that I have seen a lot of on BookTube. It hasn't made it super high on my list. I don't know if it's the cover or something, but that is Catch and Kill: Lies, Spies, and Conspiracy to Protect Predators. In a dramatic account of violence and espionage, Pulitzer Prize-winning investigative reporter Ronan Farrow exposes serial abusers and a cabal of powerful interests hell-bent on covering up the truth at any cost. It's a book on how predators get away with shit, and that's not fair. I think this book is supposed to be exploring Harvey Weinstein. Because it says one of Hollywood's most powerful producers was a predator, protected by fear, wealth, and a conspiracy of silence. That seems to be what's protecting most predators. So I've heard a lot of good things. For whatever reason, it hasn't really caught my eye. Maybe I will read it. I will probably read it because this is my favorite niche genre for some reason. Fixed It: Violence and Representation of Women in the Media by Jane Gilmore. This is another Australia book. Again, I haven't read a ton of books from Australia. I know I read one in April, but besides that, I don't know that I've actually read any Australia books before that. Not that I can think of off the top of my head anyways. So this is specifically talking about women having experienced physical or sexual violence in Australia. So I think it's kind of looking at the statistics, epidemic of gendered violence in Australia. So it's very Australia specific. So may not have a ton of American relevance, but I'm interested in learning more about Australia. So we'll probably pick it up eventually. And another BookTube darling, She Said: Breaking the Sexual Harassment Story That Helped Ignite a Movement by Jodie Cantor and Megan Toohey? I think it's Toohey. sounds right. Another book on Weinstein. There are going to be so many books on Weinstein because he was the big story that really kind of brought the movement into social media these days. This one describes a veritable Pandora's box of sexual harassment and abuse. So great wording on that. I like the wording. I like the prose of this. I don't know how much the prose of the Goodreads premise relates to the prose of the book. That would be something interesting to look into. What else does my list say? I have 2 more books and we will be done for this video. Hopefully it is under an hour. This next book was recommended by my husband. So my husband took a lot of Japanese classes. He actually got a minor in Japanese in college. And he recommended to me one of the books that he read for his Japanese minor, which is called Comfort Woman by Nora, I'm just going to say Keller and skip that middle name because I don't want to totally butcher it. On the 5th anniversary of my father's death, my mother confessed to his murder. Damn, that opening. I'm into it. He's been recommending this book to me for years, and I haven't picked it up, and I've been thinking, every time he mentions it, I'm like, oh, I should totally read that. And I haven't read it yet, but he thinks I would love it. Follows Becca, a young Korean-American girl growing up in Hawaii, as she uncovers the secret of her mother's past. Completely ignorant of her mother's history, she was sold into prostitution in the Japanese recreation camps of World War II for her oldest sister's dowry. Becca understands that her mother lives in a spirit world she cannot share. And talking about the slavery of the camps, the death of the first child, unhappy marriage to an American missionary. By the sounds of it, there's a lot of missionary history with Japan, which I would also be interested in learning a little more about. This one, I just need to read it because I know my husband has it on his Kindle from his Japanese class. And again, I need to read more books outside of America. America is dominating this year's reading, and I need to just break that cycle. And actually, that's it, because the last book on my list was Unbelievable, which I think we've already established is a false report. A false report. Unbelievable. There is a joke in there somewhere about a false report and changing titles, I'm sure. So I hope you have all enjoyed this little look-see into my recommendations. Hopefully later today I can film all the rest of them and have it up sometime this weekend, because these videos take so much out of me and I just want them out of the way because there's so much to talk about. Yeah, let me know down in the comments, please, if you have any more recommendations. I will definitely add them to my list. Please like, subscribe, and be my best friend on social media. I will see all of you in my next video. Bye, friends.